LiSTNR production.
Two ex-detectives execute a drug dealer in a bid to steal his drugs. And a court trial that pitted one alleged murderer against the other. I'm Dan Mullins. This is Crime Insider's Judgment, a deep dive on a judge's final verdict of a crime and what transpired to incite that judgment. This week, it's the trial of Rogerson and Glen McNamara for the murder of Jamie Gao. The trial became a significant case in Australian criminal history, showcasing the fall from grace of two former New South Wales police detectives. Rogerson was once one of the most decorated officers in the New South Wales police force, known for his work in the drug squad. However, his career was marred by numerous allegations of corruption, including bribery, attempted murder, and drug dealing. Despite his controversial reputation, Rogerson maintained a public image until his involvement in the murder of Jamie Gao. He toured the country in a three-man show called The Good, The Bad and The Ugly, with former AFL star Warwick Capper and the former face of Energizer batteries, Mark Jacko Jackson. He also starred in a show called The Wild Colonial Psychos with Jacko Jackson and Mark Chopper Reed. Rogerson was a known associate of Arthur Neddy Smith, one of the nation's most infamous criminals, who claimed Rogerson had given him a red light to commit crimes like dealing heroin and organising contract killings. Rogerson once said the people he shot never ended up in hospital. They went straight to the morgue. Rogerson became a household name when he shot dead 23-year-old Warren Lanfranchi, who was a drug dealer like Jamie Gao. They met in Dengar Place in Chippendale. Lanfranchi was hit by two shots, one in the chest and one in the head. At the time, Lanfranchi was being investigated for pulling a gun on a police officer. A known associate of Neddy Smith's, Lanfranchi was driven by Smith to the meeting to pay Rogerson $10,000 to make the investigation disappear. Rogerson shot Lanfranchi dead. Lanfranchi's girlfriend, the King's Cross drug addict and prostitute Sally Ann Huckstep, later told police Rogerson shot Lanfranchi dead and then stole the $10,000 from Lanfranchi's lifeless body. Sally Huckstep was later found dead in a pond in Centennial Park. No one has ever been charged over the murder. Rogerson's wife once said, "He said he didn't know what time he'd be home, but if he wasn't home by 6 o'clock, then I'd know he'd been killed." Glen McNamara, while less notorious than Rogerson, was also a former police detective. He had been out of the force for some time and was working as a private investigator at the time of the crime. McNamara had no prior criminal convictions, making his involvement in the crime particularly shocking. He'd written true crime books, telling stories of corrupt police and tales of Sydney's underworld. His former colleagues said after his conviction, he held ambitions of being a gangster. Jamie Gao was a 20-year-old university student and small-time drug dealer. He was lured into a fatal trap set by Rogerson and McNamara under the guise of a drug deal. McNamara and Gao met in early 2014 when McNamara was working as a private detective for one of Gao's friends. Gao was acting as a Cantonese interpreter. The pair met more than 20 times and exchanged hundreds of text messages. The day before the murder, Rogerson cleared a storage shed at Padstow. McNamara went to a separate storage facility and picked up a Quintrex speedboat, hooked it up to his car, and took it back to his apartment, parking it under the building. That night at a pub in Hurstville, Gao met with McNamara to finalise the drug deal. The pair were captured on CCTV walking to a quiet area of the pub near the pool tables. They have a short conversation, shake hands, and leave. On the morning of the meeting with McNamara and Rogerson, Gao told his cousin, "I've got a big deal coming off today. I'll be wealthy by the time it's over." He mentioned the name Glen. McNamara agreed to purchase 2.78 kilograms of the drug ice, and the deal was to go down at a rent-a-space storage shed in Padstow, the shed Rogerson had cleaned out the day before. On the afternoon of the murder, Gao arrived at nearby Arab Road in a car with two associates. Gao, carrying a black backpack, got out of the car and climbed into McNamara's car. The pair travelled the short distance to the storage shed, arriving at 1:46 p.m. McNamara parked his car outside. Rogerson arrived 3 minutes later. CCTV footage shows Rogerson leave the shed to move his car in front of McNamara's. 5 minutes later, McNamara can be seen collecting a surfboard bag from his car and re-entering the storage shed. At 2:18 p.m, McNamara can be seen dragging the surfboard bag out of the shed. He and Rogerson loaded into the back of McNamara's car. The prosecution at the pair's trial said the meeting was a setup to rob Gao of his drugs and then murder him to eliminate any witnesses. McNamara claimed it was a meeting with an informant to collect stories for his next true crime book. Gao was shot twice in the chest. His body was wrapped in a blue tarp, placed in a surfboard bag and dumped at sea off Cronulla. His body was discovered 6 days later. Following Gao's disappearance, his family grew concerned and reported him missing. Police initially went down the avenue of investigating his links to criminal groups and the possibility that he had been murdered over a drug deal gone wrong. The breakthrough came when police uncovered evidence that placed both Rogerson and McNamara at the scene of the murder. Additionally, forensic evidence, including DNA and cell phone data, was used to connect the two men to the crime. There was also extensive CCTV footage at Arab Road and at the storage unit. Neither McNamara nor Rogerson made any attempt to conceal their identities, a remarkable oversight for two ex-police officers. An oversight even if they planned only to conduct a drug deal, notwithstanding that drug deal would be worth almost $3 million. 2 days after Jamie Gao was murdered, Rogerson and McNamara were spotted having drinks with friends at the Crown Hotel at Revesby. We'll get to what happened inside the shed in a moment, but by way of background, the court heard that after the murder, Rogerson and McNamara put Gao's body in the back of McNamara's car and then drove back to McNamara's Cronulla apartment. Downstairs in the car park, they realised they weren't strong enough to lift the body out of the car and into McNamara's boat, the plan being to drop the body into the ocean. The pair had to drive to a local hire store at Tarrant Point to hire a 2-ton chain block. They returned to McNamara's unit block and loaded Gao's body into the boat. The court heard the pair then grabbed a 6-pack of beer and caught a lift up to McNamara's apartment to relax. The pair were seen leaving the apartment the following morning, armed with fishing rods, and later they headed out to sea where Gao's body was dumped. 6 days later, fishermen found Gao's body wrapped in a blue tarpaulin floating 2.5 kilometres off Cronulla's Shelley Beach. Coming up, what actually occurred in the storage shed that day, and what was to later become the subject of great deliberation in the pair's murder trial. Rogerson and McNamara's initial trial began in July 2015, but was quickly aborted due to comments made by McNamara's barrister, Charles Waterstreet, who suggested that Rogerson had killed 2 or 3 people during his time as a police officer. The suggestion was McNamara feared for his own life through his involvement with Rogerson. This comment was deemed potentially prejudicial, leading to the jury being discharged. A new trial commenced on the 1st of February 2016 in the Supreme Court of New South Wales. Both Rogerson and McNamara pleaded not guilty to murder and drug charges. The Crown argued that there was a joint criminal enterprise between Rogerson and McNamara to kill or seriously injure Gao and steal the drugs. They presented CCTV footage showing Gao, McNamara and Rogerson entering the storage unit, with only Rogerson and McNamara leaving, McNamara dragging what appeared to be a heavy surfboard bag. Evidence included gunshot residue found on Rogerson's clothes, which suggested he had fired the gun, although it couldn't be conclusively proven who pulled the trigger. DNA samples found on Gao's body and the tarp he was wrapped in linked Rogerson and McNamara to the crime. Autopsy results indicated that Gao had been shot multiple times, and the method of death suggested a deliberate act of murder. The prosecution presented phone records that showed Rogerson and McNamara were in contact with each other on the day of the murder. The phone data also placed them in the vicinity of Gao's location at the time of his death. Several key witnesses testified that they had seen McNamara and Rogerson with Gao in the days leading up to the murder. Some witnesses also claimed to have overheard conversations about a drug deal, suggesting a motive for the crime. Security camera footage showed the pair transporting the bag containing Gao's body, further linking them to the murder. 5 days after the murder, detectives searched the storage shed. They later seized the car from Glen McNamara's garage. Under the driver's seat was Jamie Gao's backpack and the 2.7 kilograms of ice. February 1st, 2016, the Supreme Court of New South Wales. Let's start with Rogerson's defence. Rogerson claimed he was unaware of McNamara's intentions, asserting that Gao was already dead when he arrived at the storage unit. He maintained that McNamara had told him Gao shot himself twice during a struggle. In Rogerson's version of events, he said he told McNamara, "Glen, the only thing we'll be doing here is calling the cops." And he said McNamara told him if they didn't get out of there, they'd be killed by Chinese triad members, Gao's associates. Now to McNamara's defence. McNamara argued that he was acting under duress, claiming Rogerson had threatened him and his family. He stated that he did not know Rogerson had a gun and was coerced into assisting with the body disposal after the shooting. McNamara told the court he and Gao were in the shed for a few minutes prior to Rogerson arriving. Then the door of the shed slid open, and after closing it, Rogerson demanded Gao hand over the drugs. McNamara claimed Gao pulled out a combat-style knife, and at the same time, Rogerson pulled a gun from his right pocket and shot Gao dead. McNamara testified that Rogerson said to him, "Get up and f***ing help me, you weak or I'll leave you on the floor lying next to him. He pulled the f***ing knife first. Get up and help me or you'll be as dead as him." McNamara told the court Gao stopped moving. There was no noise. He just killed him. Both accused turned against each other in court, blaming the other for the actual killing. CCTV footage was pivotal, capturing the movements of all parties involved. However, the gun used in the murder was never found. Witness statements included those from Gao's friends, who had engaged McNamara as a private investigator for unrelated drugs charges, which inadvertently led to Gao's involvement with McNamara. To the judgment. On June 15, 2016, after a trial lasting 4 months, the jury of 5 women and 7 men found Rogerson and McNamara guilty of murder and drugs charges. It took the jury just under a week to reach the verdicts. On the 2nd of September 2016, Justice Jeffrey Bellew sentenced both to life imprisonment. He said in sentencing, 75-year-old Rogerson and 57-year-old McNamara had acted with a complete disregard for the life of another human being. Justice Bellew said he was satisfied McNamara and Rogerson had come up with a plan to kill Gao well in advance of that fateful day in a storage shed in Padstow. He said, "The deceased was executed in cold blood, just as the offenders had planned." He said, "The joint criminal enterprise to which each offender was a party was extensive in its planning, brutal in its execution, and callous in its aftermath." The trial could not determine who fired the shots that killed Gao. The judge highlighted that the motive was purely financial gain, describing the murder as a cold-blooded execution. Rogerson was also sentenced to an additional 12 years for drug supply, while McNamara received a similar sentence for related drug offences. Jamie Gao's family issued a statement in the wake of the sentencing. It said, "To have these 2 men who took Jamie from us sentenced to essentially die in jail is absolutely fitting. The courts can't lessen the term of Jamie's death or the impact that his death, the investigation and ensuing trial has had on our family. Unfortunately, there is no opportunity for a lesser sentence for Jamie or for those of us left behind. When it comes to losing a family member you love through murder, there is no real justice. There has been no opportunity to present evidence to clear Jamie's name of the alleged crimes he's been accused of committing, as put forward at various junctures throughout the trial. There was no burden of proof offered to him prior to finding him guilty in the court of public opinion." Now to their appeals. Both men appealed their convictions and sentences in the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal in 2021, but were both unsuccessful. Rogerson's attempt to appeal to the High Court was denied in March 2023. McNamara, however, was granted leave to appeal to the High Court, focusing on the exclusion of evidence about Rogerson's alleged confessions to other murders. This was intended to support McNamara's claim of acting under duress. Nonetheless, this appeal was also dismissed in November 2023, with the High Court affirming that the evidence was correctly excluded as prejudicial to Rogerson. The trial was extensively covered by the media, not just for the sensational aspects of a former celebrated detective's criminal downfall, but also for the insight it provided into the underbelly of Sydney's crime scene and the historical issues of corruption within the police force. Public interest was high, partly due to Rogerson's long-standing notoriety from previous allegations and his portrayal in media like the TV miniseries Blue Murder. New South Wales Detective Chief Inspector Russell Oxford led the investigation into Gao's murder. He addressed the media outside the court.
And it's simply come down to the case of 3 men walking into a unit and 2 men coming out. It's as simple as that. This young man, Jamie Gao, I suppose a lot's been forgotten about him. He was lured into this unit, nailed into a drug deal, and then simply executed. Regardless of what was said about young Jamie, he's still a human being. He could have been any one of our sons or daughters or grandchildren. So I think today, that's probably what's lost in today, is Jamie Gao's been executed.
On the 18th of January 2024, Roger Rogerson was taken from Sydney's Long Bay Jail to the Prince of Wales Hospital at Randwick after suffering an aneurysm. He died the next day, aged 83. Former New South Wales detective Deborah Locke was at the centre of Rogerson's grip on the police and faced horrific consequences for standing up to him and his corruption. Deborah joined us previously on Crime Insiders. In her episode, she provided an insight into Rogerson and the trial.
One of the most scariest persons I ever met in my life was Rogerson. I was very happy when he died. And when him and Glen, and I knew Glen, and I accidentally regret supporting Glen. Glen wrote 2 books, and there was a media article where he's got his arm around me up the cross, and I'm supporting him as an honest cop. And Glen McNamara, and little did I know that years later, Glen and Roger would, be involved in the killing of Jamie Gao. And but when they went to trial for that murder, I was there most days waving at him. I was giving him a little wave, going, "Hi, Glen. Hi, Roger." Roger told me that I was an effing idiot, that I never took money, and it's like, I'm free. I could jump out of that courtroom, and I could go buy a sandwich. They were going back down to the cells at the end of the day. Like as bad and as shitty as my life's been, I don't regret the choices I've made by being an honest cop. They made choices, and they, and the opinion was that I was an idiot. But who's laughing now? They both got a life sentence. Like, Roger didn't expect to die in jail. That was the last thing he ever. The guy was a psychopath. He was a narcissist. He was highly intelligent and a great bloke to have drinks with. But I'm sure he was very shocked at how his circus ended.
Glen McNamara remains in prison serving a life sentence for murder. The case of Rogerson and Glen McNamara stands out as a stark reminder of how far corruption can extend within law enforcement. It also highlights the complexities of legal proceedings when dealing with historical figures with dubious pasts. The trial not only ended with the life imprisonment of 2 men, but also served as a closure to a chapter in Sydney's crime history, reflecting on the themes of greed, betrayal, and justice. Thanks for listening to Crime Insider's Judgements. We love hearing your feedback, so please rate and review this episode. If you have a case you want us to cover, let us know via Instagram at LiSTNR Crime or TikTok at LiSTNR Crime Team. I'll be back again next Thursday with another case. I'm Dan Mullins. Thanks for listening. This series was recorded and produced on Gadigal land.